This workshop is focused on strategic planning. But strategic planning is just part of the whole system of ODeL. Yung other systems are being taken up in the other workshops. So to take a holistic view, we have to understand the whole system first, right? So what is the system's approach to ODeL? This is based on a perspective that ODeL is planned learning as opposed to informal or spontaneous learning. What is unique about ODeL is that the functions of teaching and learning have already been unbundled or disaggregated. So you have different subsystems working on different parts. Each would have its own specialization. And they work together to be able to deliver ODeL. I'll be discussing the different parts later on. Now, ODeL is any form of technology-supported learning that requires special techniques of course design, special instructional techniques, special methods of communication, as well as special organizational and administrative arrangements. The fact that students are and teachers are separated by time and space, whether it's blended or full DE, it would require certain adjustments in terms of not only of teaching methodology, but also in terms of organizational systems, administrative requirements. So what are the subsystems that comprise the whole system? First, we have the course design subsystem, we have the teaching and learning subsystem, we have the student support subsystem, and we have the organization and management subsystem. So the course design refers to the design of the instructional model, how we're going to deliver. So in the first activity, we saw where we are right now. Most of us are doing face-to-face, few of us are doing DE, and in the middle, there's a growing number of blended, who are doing blended. So those are basically the instructional models. And in the future, parang meron tayong consensus that's going to be more of blended, right? Now, you also need curriculum development, and all of us are familiar with curriculum development, no? And of course, instructional design. The courses have to be delivered in a flexible mode, henceforth, the design has to follow that approach. And in terms of teaching and learning, that would be the implementation of the instructional model, the delivery part. How are we going to make the courses accessible to the students? That includes training the faculty members in the art and science of course materials development for flexible or DE. We need to provide instructional support services to our faculty members. Kasi when we deliver it through technology, hindi natin ma-expect na all of the teachers would be familiar with all the intricacies of the technology that we are using. So there has to be tech support. The faculty members have to be taught how to use the technology for teaching and learning. No? They have to be assisted in terms of multimedia production. Hindi naman lahat tayo writers, script writers, directors. So we need these creative people to assist us. These are instructional services that would have to be provided to the faculty members. And there's, of course, assessment and evaluation of learning. So when you deal with flexible education, you have the capacity to massify the number of students. And if you have hundreds of students per course, then your assessment have to be adjusted as well. And especially if they are located in different parts of the country or the world, how are you going to make sure that the assessment remains effective and valid and retains its integrity as a result of that? Now, since your students are geographically dispersed or they don't come to the class on a regular basis, like in a blended or flexible or flipped class mode, then you have to provide student support services. So in regular setting, students would just go to the faculty office, to the college secretary's office if they have administrative concerns. No? Walk-in lang yan. But if they're dispersed or if they don't come to class on a daily basis, then there has to be a support system to them. No? And you have to provide academic, administrative, and technical support. Academic, in terms of academic policies. Yung hindi lang naiintindihan, tatanong nila yan. No? How do you respond to those questions? Administrative, registration procedure, dropping, LOA, things like those. How do they go about it? You have to provide the information and technical support. How do they make use of the LMS? How do they access the learning materials that are online? Things like those. And then you have to develop the student support staff. No? There are special skills that are expected of student support people. No? They should be able to identify the needs of the learners and be able to provide the cognitive, administrative, and systemic needs of those students. And integrating all of these subsystems would be the organization and management system. And that part would be strategic planning. We should be able to identify the role of technology-enhanced teaching and learning in our own university. Because if we are not able to do that, we are not going to get the support of our community. And then systems development, financial and administrative management, and quality assurance. So management has a big role in ensuring the success of all the different subsystems. So as you can see, these concurrent workshops aim to provide an overview and or introduction to the subsystems or a particular component of a subsystem. If you have other colleagues here that are attending the other workshops, no, we can see that workshop A, now this workshop that we are having right now, falls under the organization and management subsystem. Workshop B, instructional design, falls under course design subsystem. Workshop C, under teaching and learning. Workshop F, also under teaching and learning. And workshop D, under student support subsystem. QA also falls under organization and management subsystem. So, pagbalik nyo sa mga institutions nyo, if you have other colleagues attending, no, you integrate all of that and come up with a strategic plan. Now, I'm sure all of you are quite familiar with strategic planning. You are almost all of us here are administrators and heads of institutions, and you know the basic. So I'm not going to really teach you how to do strategic planning. We're just going to touch on the aspects that we have to consider when we do strategic planning in the context of ODeL. So, as we know, the three basic questions in strategic planning are: where are we now, where do we want to be, and how do we get there, right? Now, in the strategic planning process, in the context of ODeL, we usually do SWOT analysis, and the strengths and weaknesses usually refer to our internal analysis, internal assessment, those factors that are referring to the organization itself. And then there are opportunities and threats. Those are external to us. Those are the things that are happening out there in the environment, right? So when we do internal assessment, we have to look at the subsystems, because these are the factors that we have to put in place when we do technology enhanced or ODeL. So when we talk about course design, I've mentioned some of those already. And we have to look at teaching and learning. We have to look at student support. We have to look at our organization and management. Now, some of us are not doing blended or technology-enhanced learning yet, no? But we have certain competencies right now that we could develop and turn into something that could be useful for ODeL. Like, in terms of curriculum development, meron naman tayong experience when it comes to that. When it comes to design of instructional model, we have faculties or colleges in education that could also help us. No? All they have to do is to be trained to the specificities and requirements of DE to be able to apply those learning strategies in the context of DE. When it comes to teaching and learning, do we have people in the organization that are experts in media production? No? Do we have people na maaasahan natin when it comes to the IT? Of course, we have IT offices in the university, but are they aware of the requirements in DE? Are they aware of the requirements when it comes to setting up learning management systems? No? These are the things that we need to consider. Now, when it comes to student support staff, we have, of course, student support staff who address the needs of our regular students. But what are the specific requirements of student support when it comes to DE? Are they trained? Can they be trained? And if yes, how? Now, the last part would be the organization and management. Are there policies or administrative procedures that are in contrast with flexible teaching and learning? No? We have to take that into consideration and adjust those. Like for instance, sa UPOU, before pagpe-pay ng registration, cash lang. No? You have to go to the learning center. But it takes away the flexibility. The students are all over the country. So we have to introduce yung payment by credit card. We have to do online registration. We have to do online submission of grades. We have to do online viewing of grades. And right now, we have already introduced online application for admission. So certain procedures have to be adjusted to ensure that they are relevant to the target learners that you are servicing. No? So nag-a-adjust hindi lang yung teaching methodology but also the administrative procedures and requirements. But of course, you have certain policies to follow as well. No? You have CHED requirements. In our university, we have the UP code. So even if we automate certain things, we have to make sure that we don't break, no, or ano, na hindi namin nasusunod yung university code. So these things are things that we have to manage, consider, and balance. Now, of course, sa administration, it's important that we consider the management support, leadership, and the policies I've mentioned. And hiniwalay ko yung resources because this is something that administrators are also very much interested in. So there are certain sources of funding and revenues that we need to consider. Like if we offer DE or flexible modes of teaching, what are the sources of funding? Because it takes a lot, no, to be able to introduce such kind of system, na in terms of course materials development, training, and the like. So where are the sources of funds coming from? What are the sources of revenues? Fees? Are we going to sell our course materials? Are we going to charge for face-to-face tutorials? Things like those. And then the costs, there are different costs, as I've said, like there are fixed costs, fixed recurrent costs, and of course the variable costs like course materials and learning support. And of course there's technology. How is the status of the infrastructure in terms of IT in our institution? Do we have multimedia production equipment? Do we have access to LMS? Things like those. And then of course we match that with the things that are happening in the environment. Who are our target learners? What are their profile? What's their age, gender, location? Where are they located? What are the preferred learning styles? Do they have the financial capacity to take our courses? If not, are we able to secure scholarships for them? Do they have access to technology? No, things like those. And of course, digital literacy. Are they prepared for DE? No? It was mentioned yesterday, yung ating plenary, that we also need to consider the readiness of our target learner for DE, for distance education or technology-based learning. And we have to look at other educational institutions, of course, na, in our locality, the courses they are offering and their modes of delivery and the fees they are charging, because competition is important. No? We have to consider, especially for those who are privately funded. And of course, we have to consider the partners and linkages in the education sector, professions, government, non-government industry. In the case of DIMSU yesterday, they were able to raise funds from the alumni to fund their DE program. And there are other sources, no, that we can tap, international funding grants and the like. We need to study Republic Act 10650, the implementing rules and guidelines, and how we can tap that law and the provisions of the law to be able to maximize or to be able to gain the things that we need to prepare for as we offer DE programs. And there are also industry organizations like the UPOU has partnered with ITBPOP, Business Processing Association of the Philippines, and we are offering online courses in service management program to prepare people for the business processing industry. And ITBPOP has partnered with different universities. They provide computers, IT infrastructure to be able to help universities that are interested to adopt blended learning as a means for teaching service management to their students. Now, things like this, now we have to be aware of those. Then, of course, regulatory system accreditation. Of course, there's also the issue of level 3 accreditation and if you are a COD or not, COE or not. And of course, the technology infrastructure, not only in the institution's location, but also in the location of your target learners. No, we have to consider that. So as we all know, in SWOT analysis, we interrelate yung ating strength, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. There are opportunities available out there. We all know about them. In fact, we have already made a vision, very idealized vision of the future. But do we have the strength, the competencies to take advantage of those? Are our weaknesses crucial enough to prevent us from getting advantage of those opportunities? No? Are we strong enough to ward off the threats that are facing us? But are there other opportunities for us to be stronger in areas where we are weak? No? So yun yung SWOT analysis, di ba? So based on that, we are able to fine-tune our vision and come up with something that is more concrete, more specific in terms of the role of ODeL or technology-mediated learning in our own institution. So that's our role, no? So yung ginawa ating vision, that's something that's more macro. That's something that we want to happen in the future. But when we do our own visioning for our institution, then we have to consider our own context na, to be able to come up with something concrete. Of course, after that, we translate this vision into a statement, we formulate strategies, and then we do tasking and budgeting. That's the time we identify people to implement, we set up the organizational structure and the like. The nuts and bolts of management. You know. So, for this workshop, we're not going to that deep. No? All we want to do is for us to reflect on our own respective institutions and be able to see the role of teaching and learning, technology-enhanced teaching and learning, or ODeL, in our own institution, and how it's going to support our mission. Because if our constituents do not see its role in our mission, in our basic mission as an institution, then it's just going to fall by the wayside. No? Hindi siya talagang uurong. No? So, to help us, in terms of our engagement, no, with the process, strategic planning process, we have a caselet, and we're going to distribute to you now copies of the caselet. It's entitled "To Go the Distance or Not." May kantang ganito yata, di ba? And you have to answer the questions at the end of the case as a group. But we're going to discuss the answers to the questions as a plenary. So hindi na natin i-discuss, hindi na magpe-present each group. It's a very short case, by the way. So read it and then answer the questions among yourselves. You have 10 minutes to do this activity. And then we'll discuss it afterwards.